Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're good. Hope you can hear me. I'm Jack Chew. This is Chewing It Over, 12:30 till 1 o'clock on weekdays, talking about whatever is topical, usually in the world of MSK therapies and education, but whatever is hot, especially when you guys are asking for certain things or asking certain questions. One of the things I don't think I've explained necessarily over time, for those that do tune in regularly, is one of the things that fueled Chewing It Over starting last year and going so frequently was because I was needing to try and tidy up my social media usage and schedule, right? Feeds get busy, been talking on the internet about this stuff for a while. So then you get questions and people saying, I'd be interested in your thoughts and comments on this or that. And so I realized that I was just ending up, especially when we're super busy, it's not efficient use of my time, but it's also something that I really did want to interact with you guys and learn from each other. So I didn't want to retract and withdraw too far from social media. So I tried to condense it into this so that then instead of getting drawn into conversations on Twitter or Facebook or what have you, I was able to at least sort of channel it into 30 minutes a day and in this format and stream it live. So that's how that came about. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because this is the sort of thing where when I get a series of questions in quick succession about something, it seems appropriate to do a piece on it. Now, it's not as if on this, I've had loads of people, saying, how'd it go, wanting my reflections on it. It's not like that there was it's in the top 5 things in the last couple of weeks people have been asking me about, but it's not number 1. But it's something that I had been pondering myself, because I did a bit of a session like this after last year's event. So I'm talking, of course, about the virtual Physio UK conference that happened last weekend, that I was chairing a session on, and I attended certain bits and dipped in and out over the course of the couple of days. And so really, I want to admit that this isn't one where it's like, you guys have been asking, so here I'll deliver. We've had a bit of that. But also, this isn't one where I'm like, I really want to talk to you guys about it. It's a bit of a combination of both, because I think one of the things that I wanted to start with is like, I don't feel that I or anyone feels especially strongly about it. And I think that's one of the things that's sort of noticeable. Like, I don't know if anyone ends up being especially passionate about this stuff. And is that a problem? It might not matter these days. Everyone's a bit tired at the moment of these sorts of things, including many of our audience. But I think that is my opener, because I think that's where so many of you seem to be, is not bothered. And I'm unsure as to whether that matters. I don't know. I'm going to come to a few more specific points on it, but that's kind of what I wanted to frame it as. Is like, is this something that anyone really cares about? And who is it for? Because some people clearly do. Now, before I get stuck into some of the specific detail, I want to admit that I've been, so impressed by some of the people that that set about putting this together, right? For those that haven't seen it, the CSP for 2 years now have used a software called Verbella Open Campus, or Verbella Open Campus. And it's something we looked into back in the day when we were looking at reviewing sites and types for our events. And so you've got this like Sims game scenario. That's probably the best way of putting it. It's like a Sim, hopefully most people know what I mean by Sims characters and stuff. I call them avatars, and you drive them around a virtual world, and you can teleport into different rooms and stuff, and then you literally sit down and you move around it. And it's something that there's a lady called Fran who has been, I think, one of the main organisers of the event and stuff. And it's just the amount of work that she must have done, and she didn't need it to become a technologist. She needs to know all of the things about the complexities of the software as well, no doubt, liaising with the people that are helping bring the content together, and then everyone she's needing to then upskill so that they can then deliver it. I just want to make sure that I say that straight away, is like anything that I go on to say about the event is just cannot distract away from that. Like, it must have been so much work. But I think that becomes my first point, really, is that I wonder how much work was put into it and what the associated man hours and paid time was for it, for for what end, and whether that is appropriately evaluated on a regular basis. No, it will be internally, don't get me wrong, but I just mean, like, as I sit here as a member and a very interested party, someone that contributes as much as I can to the CSP and to raising standards, obviously with my MSK hat on, I always make sure that that's a distinction, is that, of course, Physio UK is for the whole profession, and so not just our favourite hobby horses in sport and MSK and stuff like that. But it's just more that then there is absolutely massive amounts of effort that go into it, right? This is not something that's cobbled together. And that almost then begs another question, doesn't it? Is that how worthwhile is it, People at our event the other day about CSP stuff, which was true. I made the mistake of not screenshotting the polling from our thing. So we've got to then go into the raw files and build graphs, which is going to take a little bit of time. But we've got some more feedback from our other CSP session. So I want to get into that about CSP membership value and fee increase type stuff. We'll reflect on that another day. But that word value came up, and it made me then think about this, like what is it doing and what is it trying to achieve? The platform itself being chosen, and then the staff expertise that you then had to raise to get people understanding it and leveling up, and the amount of moving parts that existed even just around the one session that I contributed to, and the challenges technologically were astounding. So it's just then two things I want to make sure I emphasize is, one, under no circumstances am I or should anyone question the effort levels and the attention to every detail to make things work and make things happen, namely Fran and her team, but just an incredible amount of effort. So that's one thing. But then the second thing is that worth it, right? It's almost that there's a different argument. I'd be disappointed if someone tried to cobble something together on a whim and didn't really allocate much resource to it. That's not good either. But then you could argue that then at least that's not at any significant time cost or opportunity cost. So that's that said. It does make me wonder, what is the kind of what we said years ago, really, about Physio UK generally, is that I still wonder, like, what is it for and who is it for? Because especially when you go virtual, there was an opportunity then to try to reach more members and therefore potentially talk to whatever the members decided to prioritize as issues, or run an educational conference rather than a scientific conference in that format. They've got this really interesting balance to try to strike, where you've got a membership of over 60,000 people, but then, at this event, I don't know how many people registered, and you've always got this issue where you've got registration rates and then attendance rates aren't synonymous. On a paid event, you should really have as many attendees as you do registrants, if I'm honest. However, because of the nature of the event, means that it's not all the individuals then paying and then not turning up for the thing that they've paid for, because their employers or someone else has paid for them to be there. And so, especially in their own time, they might then not skive off, but just like only dip in and out or something like that. So you've got 60,000 plus members, but you've got maybe 600 people-ish on site at any given time. That's as far as I observed it. That tended to be the sort of average number, and it's just because it's sometimes a bit north of that, sometimes a bit less than that, but it's kind of then 600 out of 60,000, just because you can imagine that those are cleanish numbers. And so then that's who's there. And then you think about the content, which, some of it really good, in terms of like the themes and the format. I really enjoyed the session I was in, and I'll talk a bit more detail about that, which was about intersector working, like how can we improve communications and bridge the divide between the public and private sector and stuff. So I'll come to that. But, those are the sorts of sessions that need to be done. But we were then, who is it for if no one's hearing it? Or only a few people are hearing it? It almost becomes then content like that, which is a really interesting thing. I'm really glad we did that session. and there's many other sessions like it, which were no doubt like, that's a good conversation to have, and it's a good conversation to broadcast. But in our case, maybe 40 or 50 people there, and which isn't that dissimilar to what it might have been in a side room of an in-person venue, by the way. But it's just more that then that almost was a focus group of a sorts, wasn't it? Or it was a presentation to say policymakers or a few other interested parties that might then rally around a cause, which isn't a problem, but it almost could be that, how do we get that message out there further, right? The pressures on the CSP's communication channels, because something like that happens, ideally something like that happens, and therefore is then heard by thousands. And your format as it isn't going to reach those, because you've got a barrier to entry with regards to cost. Then you've got, naturally, I imagine, the bandwidth limits of going with Verbila means that you have, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, but the software that they used with regards to what I call that Sims game, is that if you go with something like that, then from what I understand, there were 2,000 tickets available, is that you're then always going to only get a fraction of your membership. So you're never going to be able to broadcast that widely. And so again, I ask, who is it there for? And I think that what they've come to the conclusion of, and I imagine that that's something that then, I'm not saying that one person's made this decision, but the CSP and Physio UK and now Virtual Physio UK, they do assign, the trappings are of a scientific conference. And I've been to and covered and spoken at various different ones, but I'm not a researcher. And I struggle to speak in those tongues sometimes. But I've presented in those, and I've done to that format. I've submitted abstracts, and I've presented data. I've presented service evaluations. I haven't done a PhD myself. I've not presented my own work or research. I'm not that guy. But I'm just meaning that I know that world. I get it. Made some mistakes in that direction as well over the years, where we've not complied within a format, and we're stood out like a sore thumb. But it's just that then the scientific piece is then a really weird one. It's like, does physiotherapy, especially with the broad church we are with disciplines from MSK and orthopedics and sport, you can, there's linkage there, but then you've got respiratory and neuro and stuff like that and community rehab. We know, of course, that umbrella needs to be cast over it, and there's some real relevant things that we have in common with our acute medicine colleagues, for example. But as soon as you then are trying to appeal to that en masse, as a scientific conference, you're then splintering things really, really far. So you're never reaching any critical mass of people that might be able to do it, unless you're just trying to get a few that are really enthusiastic about the topic, in which case there's probably cheaper and more efficient ways of doing it. That's kind of where my head's at with it. I just find it really challenging to think that is the best format for what would be no doubt membership funds. And by that, of course, I don't know how costly it is. Maybe they get enough in sponsorship and ticket sales and stuff that don't worry about that. But it's just more, if it is part funded by membership fees, or in this case, you've got paying members, haven't you, if it's a paid event. But it's like, is that the best use of that money? Because as a scientific conference, it naturally splinters it. Now, as far as I can't tell how high quality the content is on a scientific level, I'm not that guy. I'm not well placed for that. I can only, why not give everyone the benefit of the doubt that these are brilliant, incredible scientists of all persuasions that are delivering high quality content into their field of sort of lung ultrasound. Like, how on earth would I know it otherwise? But from the world that I know in sort of sports, MSK, orthopedics and stuff, there's some great sessions, but fundamentally it's not, because of the way of the world at the moment, it's not that they're delivering sort of it's not somewhere that you'd announce your cutting edge work, I imagine. As far as I'm aware, I don't know of the researchers that I work with. I don't know that they would be holding things back to then burst their knowledge on the scene, in part because I don't think it's going to go that far. These are important landmarks that people need to have in their careers, where they present that material, right? Publish it, present it, try to advocate for it, see if they can get it implemented and stuff. But I don't know. I don't get that atmosphere on our side of it, on the MSK sports, orthopedics, and all those interlocking things. So that's the thing that's funny. So what is it trying to be? You've got a few options, haven't you? You've got like a scientific conference, which they're trying to do. bloody hard virtually. Like a fair play for trying. You know, it's hard because there's lots more moving parts, more panels, symposia. You got a formalised chairship and stuff. So they had lots of complexity there. Then you've got what you could do, a commercial type conference, like an expo. Now, you wouldn't want necessarily CSP to do that, I think. You could. I mean, some would argue they'd like that. Loads of gadgets, gimmicks, gizmos, right, in a exhibition type hall and stuff. And it's just like almost like product based, and then it self-funds itself through commercial stuff. And you've just got pharmaceutical companies and electrotherapy companies and just a load of different things there that funds itself. A very commercial event, expo type thing. Or, obviously you're going to admit my bias to this, is that an educational conference or a policy-related educational conference doesn't have to be either of those, right? It could loosen the parameters of sort of symposia and posters and abstract submissions and the scientific trappings, which it's currently doing. But it doesn't. It's not the alternative. Isn't then just sort of commercial expo thing. Through the middle, I would argue, is something that is therefore educational for, as best you can, the majority of members. Now, you've got still the challenge of interdisciplinary type stuff between respiratory and neuro and stuff like that. But creating streams and working content up that is then, its primary goal is educational, and that everything is made as accessible as possible, because it's then rewards the content production and the educational session reaches more people. Now, my bias on this is, of course, then we've done some of that through Physio Matters and through Therapy Live. So you might think, well, why do they need to do it if you're doing it? And so that's why I'm not necessarily making the case that they would then follow in that model. You know, it might not suit them. What I'm meaning, though, is that it just seems that that's where it has this identity problem, because I think it ends up doing a bit of all three of those things and therefore not doing any of them that well. It can't triple down on the scientific conference. I've kind of just touched on that. Educationally, it ends up a little bit muddled because it's almost trying to comply within that scientific model, but then it's not. You've not got your headline topics and titles, or the format doesn't necessarily suit a process of learning or education, or a panel discussion in which there's any sort of dispute or debate or anything like that then sharpens people's thinking. There's no flagship moments like that within the educational pursuit of knowledge. Then you've got the commercial side. It has an expo area, and you have your booths and your stands and your sponsors. But I don't know. That might be a massive success for people getting return on those sponsorships, and I don't know that. But what I mean is, it's this that obviously isn't the center of it, and therefore it's not as if it's going to do that perfectly. It's not as if the whole process was linking and signposting to people to make sales for the sponsors that makes them more likely to spend thousands with the organization again. So it ends up just doing everything a bit, and therefore struggling on an identity level. Now, isn't that something that's tethered to the platform itself, because it was virtual and we all know why we needed to sort of flex virtually? I don't know. I think some of that might be the case, but part of the reason I'm describing it as such is because it's a very similar. I don't think it's actually a unique problem to the virtual ones. So this is something that's very familiar to me. This critique applies to the last couple of in-person Physio UKs that I attended. It's like, what is it about? What is it for? What is it trying to do? And what isn't it? Be more explicit about, it's not this. It's not like that. We're not complying with your suggestion because we just disagree and we've decided to go with this instead. So it's a funny one. For anyone that did or didn't attend, that's listening in live, please post your comments. I'm going to bring some of those up in a second. I noticed that some of the comments are coming in. So please do. If you did go, what did you think? If you didn't, why didn't you? Are you a CSP member? Therefore, why wouldn't you go? Because this is meant to be our conference, our annual conference. It's not as if they happen all the time. So why didn't you go? But I also wanted to just quickly touch on, we've said, so I put in the things, the bullet points to now. What is Physio UK? What isn't it? Trying to get that identity right. I think I've already spoken to who is it for? I'm a bit confused on that myself. I think there's something to be said where, if I was to make a suggestion, because that mixed clinical identity means that, is it really something you could prioritize certain clinical themes. I think rehab's such a good topic and theme, and I think they did that well, where they kind of, last few years, they've always had some sort of, because rehab really unites us all, doesn't it? So it's good that they're making that a core theme. But I would say that because of the way in which it almost sort of fractionates everyone into different disciplines, because it's trying to appeal to everyone, could you instead find some really central member type issues that becomes the main focus of it, where you're just trying to then appeal to everyone over some of the, understanding what quality issues we have, what quantity issues we have, what and I know that there is some content in amongst it, but what I mean is, like, this being like the center of the whole thing is like, I know there was some content about student placements and stuff like that, but it's just like, what if the whole agenda was set to be like, right, what is the mass appeal regardless of clinical discipline? And that Physio UK event ends up being something that draws in and is primarily for member engagement, that then is something that is really accessible. The content is applicable, you'd have to be into some sort of really weird niche for it to not be applicable to you. And that these are the issues that are driving attention and engagement from the membership. Like, could that be central to it? Now, they exist at these conferences. If you look at the program, they exist, but these are naturally side room networking type sessions. And, it's never getting more than a few hundred people at best, even if it was main room. Do you know what I mean? Because they're not there. It's not able to. And then you've got the economic challenge of that. If you did that in person, how do we fund that? Of course, I'm not pretending I'm in touch with all that data. I think the third point really that I made in the description is, how do we get members contributing their non-clinical expertise? So this is one where I've been pondering, because two of the five of you that sent me a message over the weekend, no, was it Monday that I realized this, on LinkedIn, right? So I get various different contacts across different social media and emails and stuff, but on LinkedIn, which is relevant because it's more of a sort of professional social media, isn't it? 2 out of the 5 comments I got were from people that were asking specifically as to, what are my thoughts as an event organizer, an education provider, because they were asking as to whether or not we would be able to sort of support or to offer suggestions and stuff like that. And it got me to thinking that is an area that I know the CSP have suggested historically, like, what is the skill set that exists non-clinically in the membership base that could contribute to raising the standards of the organisation? And I think that's some of the thing that my heart sinks a little bit on, is that, yeah, I have offered, and we have offered, to having quite quickly developed some knowledge in running large virtual events. From March to June of last year, we were on Fast Forward. It's pretty much all we did. We committed ourselves to then running the first Therapy Live. Now, we had as fair share of tech issues as they did with theirs, which I feel for them. It's so painful. You can't call them on that. It's just savage. It happens, and the technology is not really ready for some of what we're trying to do through it. But that is something that, when me or others will offer to help with that sort of stuff, I think there's just a number of reasons why that can't be taken up. I just wonder, like anything, would you use your staff or do you use volunteers? If you use your staff, there's an accountability process through that. If you are inviting too many volunteers to contribute, then it ends up just being a never-ending brainstorm. You never get stuff done. So a leadership style is to just be more decisive than that and not allow for more ideas to sort of flow through. I think one of the things, though, with this is, I did look on, and still look on, as being someone that really wants these things to work better than they do, or be more appealing to more people. I just think that the raw numbers would be better. For some of the sessions were brilliant, including the one that I was on, in my opinion at least. The subject matter could have been better, I could have been better, but I mean, the subject matter is definitely somewhat worth talking about. That needs to get out to more than a few dozen people. And so that's why I'm meaning that me and the team do have some knowledge to that effect, don't we? Right? We have, through all of its problems and challenges that Therapy Live might have had, we've managed to reach a critical mass of MSK professional over the course of the last couple of years. Now we're going to change things up. We're not devoted to online conferencing, even though the world's coming back together. We will be flexing and changing the format slightly, but generally speaking, we've managed to get that out there. Get the points and the education and the speakers that we're putting on. We've managed to get it to more people, and so we would have loved and could have contributed to that better than we were able to. And I worry. I've asked around. I've looked back over old messages and old emails and stuff to try and think, right, how clearly did we articulate the fact that we'd be willing to help? And it's pretty clear. But there's just various reasons, I think, why as an organisation they'd struggle to take us up on that. And that's just one example. As event organisers, would we contribute to something? Because fundamentally, we're part funding it, aren't we? With I don't think I was chairing, so I don't think I paid for my ticket this year. Last year I did out of interest and paid my ticket. But as a member, I imagine that some of that member fund is contributing to this event happening, at least in cash flow terms. It might be in the final analysis, but I imagine that it's all money, it's our organisation. So yeah, of course I would. Of course we would. And I think there's lots of people within the CSP's membership base that will have a lot of expertise that there aren't really the channels for them to exert that influence and make a difference there. And I think that would be it would definitely be a process we should learn from. So I think that's what I was getting at with that final bullet point that's on the description. The session specifically that I was involved in was a really important topic, one that I think needs to get out there, needs to be heard widely. I think one of the things that they'll try to do is actually eventually the recording will be made available, but you're going to get a massive amount of competition then across the whole conferences. Recordings, I imagine, will get made available. But this one was particularly about bridging the divide between public and private sector. Quite an honest discussion about the fact that there's sometimes these challenges where I raised the point and asked the question of our panel about like people being concerned about incentives, profit motive, how it feels unethical, feels like there's sometimes a conflict of interest. With some brilliant panelists who gave their examples outside of MSK and neuro and peds and stuff like that about how challenging the communication channels have been for them, especially in the pandemic, where if anything the private sector wants to step up and help an otherwise straining system, but it can't do. And fair play, CSP's top brass were in there asking what can the CSP do to help and stuff. So that's one of the reasons why I think that it was an important topic, some really important people in the audience, great panelists, and therefore I think entertaining and informative content, but not reaching many people. And then it ended up therefore being a bit of a focus group. Right? It was being presented in such a way that was almost like a workshop, which I'm not averse to workshops, but it's just that it's almost like an auditorium format that has to comply within its sort of scientific trappings, in that there's an abstract submitted to suggest the symposia, that then you have these particular speakers that then go in this order, that present a little piece, and then you join it up and do a Q&A. And I don't mind that format, but it just means that it always has to comply with that. It can't end up being as free flowing. And then the technology is obviously a challenge for getting people to interact as easily as they maybe would have done if they were in the room. So I just think that's where a good example is the session that I was in is a good example of how it worked well and the topic was right. I think it was an interesting session, but it's not served it doesn't serve as clean a purpose as it would have done if it had a larger reach or impact, or it was to get people's cogs turning, right? The more people, not saying that they would agree with it, but it's just like if a few hundred people then attended a session like that, and then is that, you could argue if there were thousands of people there and they just didn't turn up to it, then they're not as interested in that topic as I might be. But it's not. I think, that's a share, a sort of fair share of what else was going on there. You've got a lot of simultaneous content, and so there's just not a lot of people there, full stop. So that's an attendance, driving engagement. And so I know that speaks to a wider concern and problem for the organisation, but we all really want things to improve. The suggestions that I've heard for what we could do I've mainly channeled here about how like getting the identity right, and that might not be something that I agree with what they conclude, but just like being really focused about what it is, what it isn't, who's it for. Is this for academics to just share their work on their recent sort of audits and MSc type materials, and and then there's a bit of policy in there as well, or is it that we go central policy primary challenges for the membership at large, regardless of what discipline you're in, and then some education that might bleed in clinically is a side, or that's for another time, or that's a smaller, there's a sub show or something, or a fringe event. I don't know, but I think that we need to sort of reflect on that more carefully. Jim and Gemma have had a little back and forth. I don't know if there's anything there for me, or it's just they're talking amongst themselves. But Jim said he would happily have accepted 70k from the CSP to do it for them. I don't know if there's something in the 70k number that I don't know about. He's remembering what I was talking about Liverpool in 2016 was an epic fail. Yeah, that was the classic example. Can't believe that's 5 years ago. But yeah, we submitted something that then we thought we could co-present, and then Jim had to do it on his own, and we bombed. So yeah, that was a good example of us making a mistake. And then Jim had said that they clearly signed a contract that held them into the platform process. I think they will have done, won't they, for 2 years, two events or what have you, which is fair enough. But I think that, and I said in my reflections from last year, is that I think that what they were trying to do is wanting to make sure that when people say, what do you love about Physio UK? They must overwhelmingly say networking and meeting with people and stuff like that. So they wanted to emulate that as best they possibly could. And so they then have this Sims game avatar world where you dress your character up and stuff and do dances and go on speedboats and stuff like that, right? That was it's a good platform for doing that, and therefore they just ended up doing that 2 years running. But I think that's what is interesting, is that how many people, it's almost like who's giving that feedback. Because at the moment, what I'm seeing is a 0.0 something percentage of people are then attending. And therefore, if they're saying that they love networking, then could we find a way for them to do that isn't necessarily in the flagship event? And could the flagship event be for the majority of the members? Now, what on earth do the majority of the members want? I have no idea. I don't think the CSP do, because they don't have that good engagement. So it's really hard. I know it's a self-perpetuating issue, but we've got to try and find that out and try to pursue it. And I would say that the conference could and should be something that does that. Now, you can see I'm a bit of a somber tone today, isn't it, from me? And I think I'm not doing it on purpose, but it's like that is, I struggle to have any enthusiasm for the topic, as many of you have admitted then in your back and forth I've had with you when you've asked, what do you think of it? And I've said, I don't know. And you guys have said the same. So everyone kind of knows, is anyone bothered enough about it to really shake it up? Not if I am. But we probably should be. I think we should be bothered more about this stuff. The apathy and sort of passivity isn't going to get us anywhere. And so, maybe that's why these conversations need to spark something. Ben Ellis is very good for that. Follow him on Twitter. He's saying that you need to get out of the echo chambers, and he's been posting people's posters and research and stuff on a Twitter thread and stuff, and gets you somewhere there. But he's good at sort of saying, no, we should care, we should want better for that. But I think many of us, including me, just think, does it matter? So next year, I imagine we'll be back in person, and it'll be really fascinating to try and understand how we can create something that is different if we want to, or the CSP decide through whatever channels that this is by design, and that they're doing it on purpose, and that this is why it needs to be this style of conference in this way, and that if anything, we know, and we're happy for 0. whatever percentage of people to attend these things, because it needs to be a sample of, rather than for the masses and stuff. And it's like, that's, I'm not saying I'd agree with that, but I'm just meaning that at least that would be almost like a declared plan, right? That strategy is known, right? This conference is for these members. Does this suit you? Is this your profile? Is this the sort of person you're in, person you are, and the role you're in. Do you see what I mean? I think we probably just need to be a bit more declarative on that. Otherwise, it's just getting a bit lost in its identity, and it ends up just being a bit of a bit drab. So that's not to say it wasn't impressive, and certainly really well done to the organisers for their hard work in actually making it happen. I felt certainly well supported, and it's a really clever and special thing is Vibila Open Campus. So I'm really glad I got a chance to get in amongst it and use it like I had in that brief window. So I don't want to take away from that, but yeah, lots of things to ponder. Still early days for me thinking about what solutions would look like, but yeah, I'd be always interested in your thoughts. So please do send them over to me, and it might fuel some further discussions, especially if you fancy coming on the show to give your take on that, or sending us clips or somebody you had sent like bullet points that I'm thinking about weaving into future shows. But yeah, thanks a lot for everything. I'll see you all later for more Chewing It Over, and it'll probably be a bit more upbeat than it has been today. I admit that. All right, all the best.